Today, more than a decade after Jim Morrison's tragic death, the Morrison mystique is of greater interest than ever before. I'm Scott Muni, welcoming you to Jim Morrison, 3 Hours for Magic, a unique look at the man behind the myth, James Douglas Morrison. This special has been developed in conjunction with the Delilah book, An Hour for Magic, a collection of Morrison poetry and photographs, compiled by Jim's longtime friend and personal photographer, Frank Liscandro.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm, into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, an actor out alone, riders on the storm.
Frank Liscandro.
None of us ever realized that he was probably one of the major forces in American poetry while he was alive. Poets knew it, other poets knew it, but we didn't, his close friends. You know, sometimes it's difficult to see something that's right in front of your eyes.
If you give this man a ride, sweet family will die. Killer on the road, yeah.
For the first time ever, Jim Morrison.
I have a vision of America seen from the air, 28,000 feet and going fast. A one-armed man in a Texas parking labyrinth. A burnt tree like a giant primeval bird in an empty lot in Fresno. And elevators filled with citizens and miles of hotel corridors.
We strongly emphasize that all rights to this material are copyright James Douglas Morrison Publishing and may not be used outside the context of this show.
Girl, you gotta love your man. Girl, you gotta love your man. Take him by the hand. Make him understand. The world on you depends. Our life will never end. Gotta love your man.
One of the more disputed aspects of The Doors is their alleged breakup following the L.A. Woman album. However, the seeds of Jim's departure were planted much earlier with The Doors' biggest hit, Light My Fire, as former Doors manager Bill Siddons explains.
Jim had, at that point in time, decided to disappear, which for me was the first time he disappeared, became completely incommunicado, was gone for, I don't remember now, but 2 to 4 days. No one had any idea where he was, what happened to him. And all of a sudden this thing was, here it is. Buick is offering you, I can't remember, but it was many thousands of dollars. I mean, it was close to $100,000 to use Light My Fire in their song, and it was going to be Come On Buick, Light My Fire. And Robbie, having been really the writer of the song, I felt was the guy to make the decision, even though Jim sang it. It was Robbie's song. And for some reason that I don't remember to this day, it was a high-pressure, you got to give an answer now situation. It wasn't, we can wait till Jim comes back. So together we all decided, well, what the hell, why not? No, you know, we were all teenagers. I mean, the guy, you know, Ray was the old guy at 25, but so we decided to go for it. And Jim came back a couple days after that and found out about it and just freaked out. He just thought it was the tackiest thing in the world to do with the Doors music. Subsequently, at least I figured out that he was absolutely right. It was just bad judgment. But Jim knew for what the Doors were doing, what the Doors meant to people, that it was the wrong thing to do. Obviously, it didn't destroy their career, but it was important to him, and it created a real anger in him that anyone would do that to him. It created a stronger division between Jim and the other 3 Doors. He felt betrayed by them because of it. And no one did it to betray him. We did it because we didn't know what to do, and it was free money being dangled in front of us.
Corky Courson, the father of Jim's wife Pamela, continues.
After the first 2 albums, they were at their peak, and Pam and Jim were over in England. They came back, and And Jim found, he was notified that they were selling this song and without him. And this was sort of led to the breakup of the Doors. But anyway, Liscandro came back and he found this was happening. And he was mad as hell. And so he called Ray and he said, hell, this song will be a classic. We sell it for a damned ad, that'll be the end of it. Nobody will ever do it anything. And he was just mad as hell and he hung up like that. Pam, as she was telling it, said, well, Jim, he's your best friend. Or thing. They were just sort of violent. It was one of the few times she'd ever seen him mad. But anyway, he hung up that thing, and then Congress said, well, what do you think they're going to do? He said, don't worry. They're not going to let their little goldfish swim away.
This controversy continues with Doors guitarist Robbie Krieger telling the group's version of the story.
We never really broke up. I mean, when Jim went to Paris, he, it was understood that it was going to be a long vacation for everybody. But there was no talk of breaking up the Doors. We had finished our contract with Elektra as far as albums go, and we were going to take a long vacation for sure, but we didn't say, okay, let's break up the group, you do a solo album, you do a solo album, and whatever. I never said that. In fact, Jim had called John Densmore shortly before his death and said, hey, how's the album doing and stuff, Yeah, we might have to come back and do another one pretty soon or whatever,
Ironically, the recording of the Doors' last studio album, L.A. Woman, was an extremely satisfying experience for Jim, as American Prayer co-producer John Haney explains.
My impression of the situation was that they were enjoying the recording process, that they were enjoying the results more than any album they had made in their memory. When I say them, I underline Jim Morrison. Were enjoying the recording process more than they had in years and years and years. But of course, after L.A. Woman was completed, at that point Jim quit the band. Now I believe everybody in the band will tell you that before Jim left for Paris, that he said that he didn't really mean it and that he was planning on coming back and rejoining the band. Personally, I find this a total myth. I find this to be a myth that's been fabricated for the Doors' egos. I don't find any truth in it. Jim never alluded to it. He never inferred that he ever wanted to be a Door again. It was very important to him that the world would perceive him as a poet, not as the punk kid rock star. That's why when he left the Doors, that he signed a contract with Elektra Records to specifically make a poetry album that said Jim Morrison and had no allusion to the Doors on it whatsoever. Well, it was an executed contract. And then went a step further and executed a contract with me to co-produce the record with Jim. And then died.
Robbie Krieger.
Well, I don't know what he'd signed, but he did start, he put his poetry down on tape, which is what we used on American Prayer. And he was planning to come out with some sort of an album with it. But it's not to preclude Doors,
Who are our friends? Are they sullen and slow? Do they have great desire, or are they one of the multitude who walk, doubting their impossible regret?
City book of glad and sadness. Mr. Mojo rising, Mr. Mojo rising, Mr. Mojo rising, Mr. Mojo rising, got to keep on rising, Mr. Mojo rising.
Bill Siddons continues.
I was in the meeting in which Jim announced to us that he was moving to Paris and had no intention of continuing anything or not continuing anything. There was never a question that Jim Morrison was, from the day that L.A. Woman was finished, done with the Doors as an obligation. He finished recording all the albums under the contract. He finished touring. There were no plans to tour. There were no anything. And in fact, while Jim was in Paris, Ray Manzarek, Robbie Krieger, and John Densmore rehearsed with different singers to find a new singer, because they knew that Jim might never come back. He never said, I quit, the band is over, forget you, it'll never happen again. He also never said, I'll be back in 3 months. He just said, I don't know who I am, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what I want to do, I'm gone, don't count on me, goodbye.
Former Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek.
It just wasn't the same without Jim. I felt that we were just lost, man. Mm-hmm. It was impossible for us to continue as the Doors. We should have recorded those albums as Manzarek, Densmore, and Krieger. It would have made a lot more sense, and said, hey, we used to be the Doors. We're not the Doors anymore. The Doors are Jim Morrison, Ray Manzarek, Robbie Krieger, John Densmore. That's the Doors. Take away any part, and it's not the Doors anymore. And man, we lost the #1 part, the lead singer himself, the word man. And it was impossible to continue to be the Doors. So after the second album, I just said, "Hey, man, let's put it to bed, you guys. Let's close the Doors. There's no sense continuing. We're not the Doors. The Doors are 4 people. The Doors are not 3 people, and we could never replace Jim Morrison. So let's just give up."
Meanwhile, back at the beginning, Jim Morrison, in this rare surviving interview, explains the Doors' origins.
Ray and I both got out of school, and we're living down at the beach. And I guess he was having the same trouble I was trying to get into film. So we ran into each other by accident one day, and I showed him some songs I'd been writing, and because he was a musician, we talked about music together, and he liked them. And so from that, we started thinking about forming a group.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah. We chased our pleasures here, dug our treasures there, but can you still recall the time we cried, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.
Frank Liscandro.
Jim and Ray both have the same story, that on the beach that day in Venice, they both recognized that they had a potential to be a band.
Ray Manzarek.
God, when we first got together on the beach in Venice, man, he was one of the leanest, strongest, handsomest guys I have ever seen. I mean, you talk about a movie star. Wow. God, did he look good. I knew he was going to be a rock star as soon as I saw him, man. He comes walking down the beach, and we had just graduated from UCLA, and he was supposed to go to New York. After we graduated, I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to New York." And I said, "Well, okay, buddy, see you around sometime." And about 2 months later, I'm on the beach, man, and who comes walking down the beach but Jim Morrison? I said, "Hey, man, you were supposed to be in New York. What happened?" He said, "No, I stayed here, man. I decided to stay in LA, and I've been writing some songs." I said, "Well, far out, man." I knew he was a poet, but he had never written songs before, and I said, "Let me hear one of your songs. You know, can you just sing something, man?" And he sang Moonlight Drive, "Let's swim to the moon, let's climb through the tide, penetrate the evening that the city sleeps to hide." And I said, "Holy cow, man, that's incredible. I've never heard lyrics like that. Ooh, how weird, how strange and spooky." And I could hear organ parts and stuff behind that, man. "Why don't we get a rock and roll band together?" He said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I want to do, man." And then I looked at him, you know, hard and close, man, and he had lost, like, in those 2 months he had been in Venice writing poems up on a friend's rooftop. He didn't eat, man. He was just high the whole time, and he went from 175 pounds down to 135. And he was tan, and his hair had grown long and had soft kind of curls to it. And he looked fabulous, man. I said, "You write like this." I thought to myself, "You write like this, man, and you look like that?" I said to him, "Jim, you're going to be a star, man." He said, "Oh, Ray, come on. Maybe we got to get a singer." I said, "No way, man. We ain't getting no singer." He said, "I don't sing." I said, "You'll sing, man. You got it. Your voice is fine, man. You just sang for me right here." "Well, you can sing, man. It's your songs. It's your words. You're the star, man." I said, "What are we going to call the band?" He said, "The Doors." And I said, "Whoa, heavy, heavy."
Let's swim to the moon. Let's climb to the tide. Penetrate the evening that the city sleeps too high. Let's swim out tonight, love. It's our time to try. Art beside the ocean on our moonlight drive. Let's swim to the moon. Let's climb to the tide. Surrender to the waiting worlds that laugh against our side. Nothing left open and no time to decide. We'll step into a river on our moonlight drive.
Once again, Jim Morrison.
I would say that the basic style or sound was there from the beginning because of the unusual instrumentation, just an organ, a guitar, and a drum, and a singer. So that's been the same all along.
Let's swim to the moon. Let's climb to the tide. You reach your hand to hold me, but I can't be your guide. I love you as I watch you moonlight drive, baby. Moonlight drive. Come on, baby, gonna take a little ride down by the ocean side. Gonna get real close, get real tight. Baby, don't talk tonight.
Jim's longtime friend and personal photographer, Frank Liscandro.
It was the first time I saw him on stage. It was the first time the Doors were ever on stage at the London Fog. And, they had asked all their friends to go to that particular performance because it was the first time they were ever going to be on stage on Sunset Strip, and, they wanted a big audience. Well, at that time, I don't think Jim felt anything but a great deal of shyness and fear, because for most of the performance, as I remember it, he kept his back to the audience. The band was playing, and they were making music, and people were dancing, and we were all kind of, the UCLA film school was all there en masse so that we could support our local heroes. But in fact, Jim wasn't up to the kind of tenor of the evening, and I went away with the feeling that, gee, I don't know if this guy's gonna ever make it as a lyricist, as a singer, as a vocalist.
his own words, Jim explains his feelings about music.
I think music, songs, films are a way one person tries to break down the separation between him and other people in the world. So it's like a striving, an expression of a desire for contact or reaching out of hands, communion with other things.
You mean eat your dinner, eat your pork and beans. I eat more chicken than any man ever seen. Yeah, yeah. I'm a backdoor man. Don't you know, but the little girl understand.
Backdoor Man, a cover tune by The Doors off their first album, The Doors. On stage, as well as in life, Jim Morrison was the consummate performer. Ray Manzarek explains.
For Jim, being on stage was just about everything, man. Everything off stage really didn't matter, man. He got on stage and he came alive, and he was just the most exciting and dynamic performer I'd ever seen, man. He would go through trips on stage. You wouldn't believe the personalities that would come out of him, the intensity that he would speak to the audience. I'd seen him, man, he'd hypnotize an audience. 15,000 people would just be hushed, just stopped, man, not even breathing. Like in the music's over, when the screaming and everything comes down, man, and it's Jim's time to start to sing again. On the live album, on Absolutely Live, you can hear the people in New York using that opportunity of quiet to talk back at him. Well, outside of New York, man, New York is the glibest city in the whole world, man. Everybody's a talker in New York, so they said, hey, it's quiet now, we can talk. And Jim just shouts out at them, shut up, man, give the singer some, come on.
Shut up!
But the rest of the audiences that we would play for, man, you could just hear silence. And Jim would sometimes milk that silence, man, for 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time until it would get to the breaking point. And then he would come in with a scream, man, and just shatter everybody's nerve ends. And, man, by the time the Doors concert was over with, you were just wasted, man. You had been up and you had been down and you had been all around.
Now, is that any way to behave at a rock and roll concert?
Producer John Haney with a little scene side of Jim.
He simply was acting out all of the things that the other people didn't have the nerve to do. As a matter of fact, I always have felt that was the primary driving force behind the man that Jim and I referred to as the Kid. And the Kid would be that sleek, you know, nude to the waist, lion mane of dark hair rock and roll star. Jim and I called him the Kid. I think he considered the rock and roll star almost as another person. When he spoke of him in a second person tense. He never considered himself the rock and roll star.
Doors secretary, Kathy Liscandro.
The thing about losing his ego, being able to put on, his clown boy face and whatever was, that he was such a strong personality, had total confidence in who he was, that he could afford to do those other things. Because there was no sense of fear that he would lose who he was.
Kathy's husband, Frank Liscandro, with a story from his book, An Hour for Magic.
I think this is pretty typical. Jim had complete disregard of material possessions, and that included clothing. He didn't seem to have any sense of ownership about anything. So, with clothing as an example, I said to him one day that I had to go buy some new boots. He said he probably needed some new boots too, so he'd come along. So we went to a Western store, and I shopped around and found something. And while I was shopping around, I saw Jim darting around the store, and I didn't keep track of him until I was finished with my purchase, and I went looking for him, and I found him coming out of a dressing room, and he had bought a completely new outfit from outer garments to undergarments. And then he went over and bought a new pair of boots. And it looked like he had changed his skin. And even being more reptilian, he left his old clothes behind. Didn't take them. He said to the guy at the store, burn them or throw them away or give them to somebody. And we walked outside, and I looked at him in the sunlight in front of the store. And I realized at that instant that he could really live like a snake if he wanted to. Shed his skin, have a new set of skin underneath, and walk away.
People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange. People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange. Alright, yeah.
Doors guitarist Robbie Krieger.
People are strange. There's an interesting story about how that one was written. It's like one day, like Jim was over at my house, and where John and I lived together up in Laurel Canyon, and he was real down in the dumps, man. I mean, he was on one of his depression trips where he was gonna die, you know, and he just didn't think it was all worth it anymore, and it was horrible. Life was horrible. And so we spent all night talking him out of killing himself and stuff, you know, like we did many times. And finally in the morning he said, well, I'm going to take a walk up to the top of the hill. And he came back, and he was in the best mood I've ever seen. Man, I've just seen the light. You know, he says, it was so beautiful up there and everything. And I just wrote a song on the way back down the hill, you know. And it's because, you know, here's the words.
When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange. Alright, yeah. When you're strange, faces come out of the rain. When you're strange, no one remembers your name. When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're strange.
Again, John Haney.
I mean, there was really two people there, and they were visible physically. When he had to do a performance, the beard was gone, the rock star clothes went on, and he was a rock and roll star. But as soon as he didn't have to be on the road, the beard grew out, he put on a little weight, he took on this rather Allen Ginsbergish kind of appearance. And if people would have been wise during that period of time, he could have been seen walking up and down Santa Monica Boulevard, reading and sitting and thinking and mumbling to himself, hours and days on end. Same person, two personalities, guided by one mind. My belief is that it was the mind of the man with the beard, not the mind of the man without the beard.
Tell them you came and saw and looked into my eyes and saw the shadows of the guard receding, thoughts in time and out of season. The hitchhiker stood by the side of the road and leveled his thumb in the calm calculus of reason. And then a car passes.
In his own words, poet James Douglas Morrison.
Bird of prey, flying high in the summer sky. Bird of prey, flying high, gently pass on by. Bird of prey, flying high, am I going to die? Bird of prey, flying high, take me on your flight.
Not unlike his poem, Jim's public image left him open to many a bird of prey.
Time to walk, time to run, time to aim your arrows at the sun. Take it easy, baby, take it as it comes. Don't move too fast, and you won't show love to last. You can move and what you say.
Frank Liscandro sets the media record straight.
I think the primary misconception that has been overworked in the media is that Jim was some sort of drunken comic fool. That is not the case. Jim did not get up in the morning to have a drink. He didn't write when he was drunk. He only wrote when he was sober. He was drunk an awful lot, but he drank because there were demons and voices and spirits shouting inside of his head. And he found that one of the ways to quell these kinds of voices was with alcohol. And I think these were the voices of his creation. So he used alcohol as kind of a relief from those from the incessant demands of his creative spirit. He was not drunk all the time. He was rather working during those times. I mean, he produced so many poems. There were so many rehearsals and performances and recording sessions that if he was drunk all during that time, none of that material would exist. He wouldn't have been able to produce it. He did get drunk in the recording studio, but it would be over a course of a night. And by the end of the night, Paul Rothschild would kick him out of the recording studio because he was too drunk to perform anymore. But it wasn't as if in the morning he got up and had a drink and drank all day and then got into a lot of trouble and was crazy. In fact, he did business. He had his own desk at the Doors office that he insisted on having so he could go in and answer his correspondence and do business. And he wrote a screenplay with Michael McClure, and during which time, over a couple of 3 months period, I never saw him drunk during the day during this time. He was seriously writing.
Jim's father-in-law, Corky Courson.
This guy died at age 27. At that time he'd made 2 movies. He'd written a stack of books. He published a book of poems. He'd done all the lyrics for the Doors. He'd done all of these things at age 27. And people say he was 100% drunk. How does it add up?
Well, show me the way to the next little girl. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. Show me the way to the next little girl. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. For if we don't find the next little girl, I tell you we must die. I tell you we must die. I tell you, I tell you, I tell you we must die. Say goodbye. We lost our good old mama and must have whiskey all your way.
John Haney discusses Jim's much publicized drug use.
I know personally that Jim, in the early days of the Doors, experimented with drugs. He certainly experimented with psychedelics. But I know from personal experience that Jim didn't like drugs. And it's interesting why he didn't like drugs to me. It wasn't so much that he didn't like doing drugs, he didn't like the experience of drugs. We got to a point in his life where he felt that the exercise of scoring drugs, of getting the narcotics, of meeting somebody in a dark alley, of having some stranger come to his door and knock on it in the middle of the night, he felt that was sleazy. He felt that was beneath him. He felt that whole environment made him just uncomfortable. He liked the fact that he could go into any liquor store and lay a $5 or $10 bill on the counter and walk out with a bottle of liquor. It was direct, it was simple, it was uncomplicated. And he didn't feel particularly awkward about that. So there was no drug use in Jim's life at all during over many, many of the latter years of his life.
Before you slip into unconsciousness, I'd like to have another kiss, another flashing chance at bliss, another kiss, another kiss. The days are bright and filled with pain. Enclose me in your gentle rain. The time you ran was too insane. We'll meet again. We'll meet again. your freedom lies. The streets are fields that never die. Deliver me from reasons why you'd rather cry. I'd rather fly. The crystal ship is being filled. 1,000 girls, 1,000 thrills, a million ways to spend your time. When we get back, I'll drop the line.
Jim's former roommate and drinking buddy, Babe Hill, in his first public interview.
All I said was that when the guy got drunk, he was out of control a lot of the times, and he wasn't.
And you said he was
an attractive character.
Nobody argues with that, and nobody argues with the fact that.
Well, we got a lot of argument when I first brought it up.
You ain't the argumentative type, are you?
I never argue about anything. I do not. From the first time I met him, we went camping in Big Sur.
Yeah.
And he started pulling big firebrands out of the fire and waving them up in the tree branches, right? Really make you popular, you know, and Smokey the Bear and everything. I mean, he always did these weird things. Mm-hmm. I mean, as long as I knew him, for like 3 years, he did these things to me. And they were senseless.
Jim's drinking bouts were considered the cause for much of the dissension within the group. Caught in the fallout was Jim's wife, Pamela, as her father, Corky Courson, explains.
She was an accepted cause by everybody that had any involvement with Jim for pulling him away from him. That's the only thing. She pulled in a different direction. She wanted Jim to become a writer. And you've got to get out of this rock and roll world. It's going to kill you.
Once again, I'm Scott Muni, inviting you to join us for part 2 of Jim Morrison, 3 Hours for Magic, at which time we'll continue with more weird scenes inside the Morrison gold mine. We'll explore the man who helped shape contemporary American music through his words and actions, as we cover such topics as his personal struggle to be recognized as a poet, his unorthodox writing habits, and his very special relationship with his wife, Pamela. Join us then.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, an actor out on loan. Riders on the storm.
Hello, I'm Scott Muni, welcoming you back to Jim Morrison, 3 Hours for Magic. During this very special hour, we'll be examining Jim Morrison, the poet, his words and actions. This special has been developed in conjunction with the Delilah book, An Hour for Magic, the best-selling photojournal written by Jim's longtime friend, Frank Liscandro. Again, we remind you that all exclusive material contained throughout is copyright James Douglas Morrison Publishing and may not be used outside the context of our show. And now, without further ado, Jim Morrison, 3 Hours for Magic.
Don't you love her madly? Don't you need her badly? Don't you love her ways? Tell me what you say. Don't you love her madly? Wanna be her daddy? Don't you love her face? Don't you love her as she's walking out the door? Like she did 1,000 times before. Don't you love her ways? Tell me what you say. Don't you love her as she's walking out the door? All your love, all your love, all your love, all your love, all your love is gone. So sing a lonely song of a deep blue dream. 7 horses seem to be on the mark. Yeah, don't you love her? Don't you love her as she's walking out the door? All your love, all your love, all your love. Yeah, all your love is gone. So sing a lonely song of a deep blue dream. 7 horses seem to be on the mark. Don't you love her madly? Don't you love her madly? Don't you love her madly?
Frank Liscandro.
Pamela knew Jim from the days at the Whiskey, from the days when the Doors first started playing at the Whiskey. Now that was a long time. She was there on the day he died. We're talking a good 5-year span, which she supported him, stayed with him, harassed him, inspired him. You can't ask for more than that kind of loyalty from a woman. They were soulmates in the cosmic kind of sense. And I think she was really wanting to make a new life for Jim in Paris. She convinced him to leave after making the L.A. Woman album, to seek out a place of refuge, seek out a place where he could write, get his thoughts together, get his notebooks together, publish another book of poetry, maybe write a screenplay. She was always encouraging him to be a writer. She was always encouraging him to be a poet. She was always looking at Jim Morrison, the man of literature, rather than Jim Morrison, the man of rock. And I think that of all the people who surrounded Jim at that time, who knew him, who were his friends or his companions, he had the most support from Pamela from that viewpoint, that is, Jim as a poet. It was a shame that either one of them died so young. They were both bright, creative people who probably would have given the world a lot more if they would have lived longer.
Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek.
I love Queen of the Highway. That's Jim's song to his wife, Pam. American boy, American girl, most beautiful people in the whole world. Son of a frontier Indian swirl. Start it all over, man.
American boy, American girl, most beautiful people in the world. Son of a frontier Indian swirl, dancing through the midnight whirlpool.
Jim's personal secretary, Kathy Liscandro.
Doors did feel that about Pamela, that she was removing Jim from their influence in the sphere, and she was. And
Absolutely.
that was absolutely to her credit. She saw that. I think the commitment is above the meaning of the word wife.
Well, she's fashionably lean, and she's fashionably late. She'll never rank a scene, she'll never break a day. But she's no drag, just watch the way she walks. She's a 20th century fox. She's a 20th century fox. No tears, no fears, no ruin years, no clocks. She's a 20th century fox. She's the queen of cool, and she's the lady who waits. Sets her mind, let's go on. It never hesitates. She won't waste time on elementary talk. 'Cause she's a 20th century fox. She's a 20th century fox. Got the world locked up inside a plastic box. She's a 20th century fox, oh yeah. 20th century fox, oh yeah. 20th century fox, oh. She's a 20th century fox.
American Prayer producer, John Haney.
Inferred in all of this rock star syndrome is the fact that he was screwing everything that walked, which is categorically untrue. If he was faithful to anybody, he was faithful to Pam. They were soulmates. They were soulmates. There was something that goes beyond love that was between the two of them. They were soulmates. They shared something very, very deep and very private that no one will ever know about except the two of them. And they're not here to tell us about it. And if they were here, they wouldn't tell us about it because it was private. And it was so strong and so powerful that he came back to her. She was the woman in his life. She was the woman that he loved. And if she fooled around a little bit, it didn't make any difference to him, because I think that possibly sex was not, in their case, a proof of love. Love manifested itself in ways other than sex.
I'm gonna love you till the heavens stop the rain. I'm gonna love you till the stars fall from the sky. For you and I.
Touch Me, a Robbie Krieger song released in December 1968. Poet James Douglas Morrison.
Winter photography, our love's in jeopardy. Winter photography, our love's in jeopardy. Sit up all night, talking, smoking, count the dead and wait for morning.
Sometimes Pamela's best intentions had humorous effects, such as the time she induced Jim to see a psychiatrist. Corky Courson, Jim's father-in-law, explains.
He was going through one of his trips. One time she said, "Jim, why don't you see a psychiatrist?" And of course, Jim being what he was, he immediately said, "Well, shall I go to someone who sticks to the straight Freudian philosophy?" So he went on and said for about an hour. Then he said, "Well, how about Jung?" So that took another hour. Then he said, "Well, what about Adler?" Finally, she said, "Jim, why don't you just go down to Dr. So-and-so, you know, he's been recommended." I didn't talk to him. So I said, "Okay." Evidently something had happened. He wanted to please her. So he went down there and came back a couple hours later. And Pamela says, "Well, how'd it go, Jim?" Pretty good, pretty good. He had some questions to ask. And said, "I was supposed to go back a couple of weeks." Couple of weeks he went back, came back, same thing. "How'd it go?" "Pretty good." "You going back?" "No, I don't think I'll go back." Well, that psychiatrist started calling, and he called every day for about a week. Jim had so turned him on to all the problems world that Jim had that he couldn't wait to get back, and he just wanted. He said Jim never went back. Of course, knowing Jim, you never know whether he's putting you on or not. I could just see him there, sitting there with his psychiatrist, really giving this guy the biggest trip in the world.
Strange days have found us. Strange days have tracked us down. They're going to destroy our crash. You will join. We shall go on playing our fight on your town. Strangers, still strangers. Voices will signal their tired end. The hostess is grinning. The guests sleep from sinning. Talk of sin, and you know this is it.
Doors guitarist Robbie Krieger.
Yeah, there's the whole thing about Jim changing his image and all this stuff. It's a bunch of hogwash. I mean, I don't think he purposely wanted to change his image from a rock star to a drunken bum, you know. I think it just happened that way, because, you know, he just, that's how he was. He started drinking too much, and so he got sloppy and fat. And, you know, I don't think he wanted to be that way at all, because, you know, he went out, I remember he went and tried out for a couple of movie parts in a Steve McQueen movie and stuff, and I could see that he was like real embarrassed at the way he looked, you know, because for the one, he cut his beard and he cut his hair, and he looked pretty bad, you know. I think he thought he would look just like he used to if he cut all this beard and stuff off, you know. He looked terrible. He looked like Engineer Bill or somebody. He always wore these Engineer Bill pants. He came back from the interview and he was pretty embarrassed, I think. So I don't think he purposely tried to look that way, like some people would say.
Contrary to the public image, Jim Morrison, in fact, was quite the Southern gentleman. Corky Courson elaborates.
Pam was left alone home in their house there, and she got sick. Nothing would serve her except that her grandmother, my mother, came up there and stayed with her. She came back and she couldn't say enough about how great Jim Morrison was. He laid the Southern charm on her and everything, how sweet she was, and to come up there and take care of Pam. So Mom had to do the shopping and everything, and she couldn't go out the store, so Jim just told Electra the Doors to have this limousine over there. And then after Pam got to feeling better, he drove her all the way home. And she came back to Orange in a limousine. Man got out. She walked into her house and she was the talk of the neighborhood. And this is the Jim Morrison Show.
Love me one time, could not sleep. Love me one time, baby. Yeah, my knees got weak. Love me 2 times, girl. Last week, all through the week. Love me 2 times, I'm gone away.
In his book, No One Here Gets Out Alive, Danny Sugarman presented an entirely different viewpoint.
I'm not surprised at all that they object to the morality of the story. As a matter of fact, I find it a compliment. I think if they would have been pleased with it, Jim would have been misrepresented, because Jim always pissed those people off.
Jim's love for Pamela took many forms, including humor. Kathy Liscandro and Corky Courson explain Orange County Suite.
It was sort of about Pamela.
Maybe it was a part of an argument with Pamela.
More, he wrote it and sang it more to tease Pamela. But anything, it was just sort of a thing like that.
Jim did an impromptu recitation of that when we were out to dinner at the Russian restaurant that he liked, at Balalaika. It was Jim and Frank and I somebody else, and I don't know who it was. We were sitting around. They had a piano in this place, and we had been there frequently with him. And all of a sudden, Jim got up and went to the owner and said, "Can I use your piano?" Just walked over to the piano and he sat down. And he starts playing, and everybody in the restaurant's looking around. And I know what's going on. And he goes into Orange County Suite, accompaniment on the piano.
He played
it himself, right? He's playing the piano and reciting Orange County Suite, and he went through that whole thing. Got up, took a bow, came back and sat down and finished his dinner.
Well, I used to know someone fair. She had orange ribbons in her hair. She was such a trip, she was hardly there, but I loved her just the same.
The Doors, Robbie Krieger, Ray Manzarek, John Densmore.
He really had a magnetic kind of a personality. He could be in a room with maybe 20 people and just sort of, everybody would just sort of be tuned into him, no matter what his trip was at the time, or he could make you feel sorry for him, or he could take you on a trip,
But like all geniuses, he was difficult to work with, but he was also a pleasure to work with. Sometimes the guy would be just the nicest guy in the world, and at other times the demons would take over. He had those angels and devils inside of him fighting for control, and you could never be sure whether the devil or the angel was going to come out.
I think our respect for his words kept us together for so long, through the harder periods or whatever, because we knew that he was, special.
Well, I'm mad, and I'm bad.
Your cool face a hollow idol's eyes. Wild child, full of grace, savior of the human race, up to face, up to face, up to face. You remember when we were in Africa?
Once again, Ray Manzarek.
Yeah, Morrison was great. What a poet. Real American poet. His words were American. It had nothing to do with any other culture. It had to do with America. I guess that's why everybody loves him, man. He was speaking from that communal, that collective unconscious that we all share living on this part of the planet, man, this country that we live in.
All hail the American night.
Much of the exclusive material you've been listening to on Jim Morrison, 3 hours for Magic, are recordings that didn't find their way onto the American Prayer album. The co-producer of this poetry album, Frank Liscandro, explains the album's origins.
I think the origins of the American Prayer album really are with Jim. He wanted the album to be a kind of collage of sounds, his own voice, music, ethnic music, Western classical music, folk music, rock and roll music, jazz, sound effects. Jim would say something like, and here I want to hear rattlesnakes, castanets, and sirens. That's almost like a poem itself. What we wanted was an album that would be autobiographical, an autobiography in poetry and song, in words, on vinyl.
I'll keep you wild on the road, you hand upon the wheel. I'll keep you eyes on the road, you hand upon the wheel. Come to the road, that's gonna have a good time. Yeah, the back of the road has to got some bungalows. Out the back of the road has to got some bungalows. Just for the people like to go down slow. Let it roll, let it roll.
Hey, listen.
Robbie explains his experience of working on the American Prayer album.
It was really like working with Jim a lot. It's like, we'd hear his voice, we'd have the little tape recorder, and then we'd kind of write music to that, which is not unlike a lot of the stuff we did when Jim was alive. A couple of things happened that were a little spooky, like sometimes when we'd be stuck in the studio for an idea or something would happen in the studio and it would just seem like Jim was there or something, And of course when Jim's voice would come out over the big speakers in the studio, it was pretty scary. Because it was like he was right there,
The movie will begin in 5 moments, the mindless voice announced. All those unseated will await the next show. We filed slowly, languidly into the hall. The auditorium was vast and silent. As we seated and were darkened, the voice continued. The program for this evening is not new. You have seen this entertainment through and through. You've seen your birth, your life and death. You might recall all of the rest. Did you have a good world when you died? Enough to base a movie on?
The fulfillment of Jim's desire for a poetry album took form almost a decade after his death. Ultimately, the album, the only By the Doors ever to be nominated for a Grammy, was co-produced by 6 people.
The ceremony is about to begin. Wake up! Is everyone where it was? Has this dream stopped?
Corky Courson explains.
The 6 of us, the 3 Doors, Frank, Haney, and I, we put that album together. And that was the first start in fulfilling a pledge that I made to Pamela. If anything ever happens to her, I would see that Jim's works became published. She said, "Daddy, if anything happens to her, I want you to see that Jim's works are brought to the attention of the public." And the American Prayer album was the first attempt to do that. And I've got to give everyone involved credit. I can't say all the Doors didn't do their part. I think it was the thing that sort of irks me is that the publicity came out that the 3 remaining Doors did the whole thing.
The music and voices are all around us.
Initially, Elektra engineer John Haney was signed to produce Jim's poetry album. He talks about those recording sessions.
I engineered it when the session was supervised as such by David Anderley, who was head of A&R for the West Coast at that period of time. But we basically just sat there and let Jim run his course until he had said what he had to say, and then that tape was sort of put aside and no more was thought about. A little further down the road, Jim one day called me up. It was his birthday. As it turns out, it was the last birthday that he lived through. And he said he just had a feeling it was his birthday and he wanted to record on it. So I booked the studio, and I had known from Paul Rothchild, who had told me that the key to Jim's crazies, if you want to call it that, was not any drugs. It was not cocaine, it wasn't marijuana, it wasn't scotch, it wasn't bourbon, it was Irish whiskey. And as a birthday present, I bought him a 5th of Old Bushmills Irish whiskey and proceeded to take him to a recording studio over in West Hollywood. He had his material all sort of prepared as to what he wanted to read. But in reality, I put one microphone up loose in the room and set up a stand for him, and he very shortly realized, though we didn't really actually say it, he realized that what I wanted to do was I wanted to document the process of Jim getting drunk while reading his poetry. I think the second time he fell over the microphone and stand and all of the other equipment in the studio and just wiped it all out. I looked around the control room to Frank, who was there, and Kathy, who was there, and a couple of other good friends who were there. And I just looked at them, and I remember saying, "I assume you know how to deal with this." And they all just looked at me and smiled and said, "Yes, we do." And they went out and sort of helped him out, took him home. That was basically it.
Where are the feasts we were promised? Where's the wine, the new wine, dying on the vine? Resident mockery, give us an hour for magic. We of the purple glove, we of the starling flight and velvet hour. We of Arabic pleasures breed, we of sundom in the night. Give us a creed to believe, a night of lust. Give us trust in the night. Give of color 100 hues, a rich mandala for me and you. And for your silky pillowed house, a head, wisdom, and a bed. Troubled decree, resolute mockery has claimed thee. We used to believe in the good old days. We still receive in little ways the things of kindness and unsporting brow forget and allow. Did you know freedom exists in a school book? Did you know madmen are running our prison within a jail, within a gale, within a white free Protestant maelstrom? We're perched headlong in the edge of boredom. We're reaching for death on the end of a candle. We're trying for something that's already found us. Wow, I'm sick of doubt. Live in the light of certain South cruel bindings. The servants have the power. Dog men and their mean women pulling poor blankets over our sailors. I'm sick of dour faces staring at me from the TV tower. I want roses in my garden bower, dig? Royal babies, rubies, must now replace aborted strangers in the mud. These mutants, blood meal for the plant that's plowed. They are waiting to take us into the severed garden. You know how pale and wanton thrillful comes death in a strange hour, unannounced, unplanned for, like a scaring, over-friendly guest you've brought to bed. Death makes angels of us all and gives us wings where we had shoulders smooth as ravens' claws. No more money, no more fancy dress. This other kingdom seems by far the best, until its other jaw reveals incest and loose obedience to a vegetable law. I will not go. Prefer a feast of friends to a giant family.
American Prayer producer John Haney continues.
A number of weeks after that, Jim called me and told me he was going to Paris because he didn't feel that he, in reviewing the tapes that we had recorded, he felt that he had to do work on his reading voice. More importantly, he felt that he had to clarify his poetic thoughts. He had to organize his words, organize his ideas. And he felt Paris was a place to do it. He didn't feel that he could accomplish it in Los Angeles. And that was it. And he went to Paris. And, everybody pretty much has a different story as to what happened after that point.
music's over, when the music's over, when the music's over, turn up the light, turn up the light, turn up the light. When the music's over, when the music's over, yeah. When the music's over, turn up the light, turn up the light, turn up the light. Well, the music is your special friend. Damn, some virus in intense. Music is your only friend. Until the end, until the end, until the
Corky Courson, privileged to know the real story of Jim's last night in America.
He spent the last night over at my other daughter's place. They sat there and they talked and they drank, and then they started playing what they call magic. They would call up people around there and say, "Do you believe in magic?" I mean, just silly things like that. And I think there was an old place on Highland Avenue full of haunts from the old movie stars' age, and there this one old guy down there in the castle said, "Oh yes," it was the only one that really believed in magic. Said Judith took a $20 bill, I think Jim gave it to them, went down there and they put it in an envelope and slipped it under his door. And when he opened the door the next morning, there was $20 bill, and they wrote on it that it's magic. I mean, that was the way Jim spent his last night in the United States. Then he left his brown suitcase there with him with all the poetry, and he said, this is a note on it. It said, "This is brown suitcase. Please take me down to the Doors office and see that they're mailed to me in Paris." And that's the way he left the United States. I mean, it's sort of a tame departure for the great, wild Jim Morrison, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cancel my subscription to the resurrection. Send my credentials to the house of detention. I got some friends inside. The face in the mirror won't stop. The girl in the window won't drop. A feast of friends, alive she cried, waiting for me outside. Before I sing into the big sleep, I want to hear the scream of the butterfly. We're getting tired of hanging around. Waiting around with our heads to the ground. I hear a very gentle sound. Very near, yes, very far. Very soft, yeah, very clear. Come today, come today. What have they done to the earth? What have they done to our fair sister? Ravaged and plundered and ripped her and bit her. Stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn and tied her with fences and dragged her down. I hear a very gentle sound. With your ear down to the ground. We want the world and we want it. We want the world and we want it. Now.
Former Doors manager Bill Siddons.
He went off to concentrate on his writing. He was working on 2 different screenplays as far as I know, and he was working on his poetry. But he went off to stop pursuing the rock and roll dream because he'd achieved it and didn't like it. And he said, what am I but a writer? And he went off to be a writer.
In his own words, James Douglas Morrison.
And this next part will be done in a woman's voice. The truth is on his chest. The cellular excitement has totally inspired our magic veteran. And now for an old trip. I'm tired of the night. I want the old forms to reassert their sexual cool. My friend is just, you know. And this morning, before I sign off, I would like to tell you about Texas radio and the big beat. It moves into the perimeter of your sacred, sincere, and dedicated smile like a calm veteran of the psychic war. He was no general, for he was not old. He was no private, for he could not be sold. He was only a man, and his dedication extended to the last degree. Poor pretentious soldier, come home. The dark Los Angeles evening is steaming the church that we attended, and I miss my boy. Stupid and green, what the color green? When I watch the TV and I see helicopters swirling their brutal and bountiful sensation over the fields and the comic walls, I can only smile and fix a meal and think about the child who will one day own you. In conclusion, darling, let me repeat, your home is still here, inviolate and certain, and I open the wide smile of my remembrance of your lunging thighs. This to you on the anniversary of our first night. I know you love me to talk this way. I hope no one sees this message written in the calm, lonely, far-out, languid afternoon. With my total love, Shirley.
Once again, I'm Scott Muni, inviting you to join us for the conclusion of Jim Morrison, 3 hours for magic, at which time we'll deal with Jim's breakaway to Paris, his tragic death, and his strong belief in shamanism. Join us then.
So when the music's over music's over.
Jim Morrison died July 3rd, 1971.
Frozen moment by a lake, a knife has been stolen, the death of the snake. I know the impossible sea when the dogs bark. I am a death bird, naughty night bird.
5 to 1, baby, 1 in 5. No one here gets out alive now. You get yours, baby, I'll get mine. Gonna make it, baby, if we try. The old get old and the young get stronger. May take a week and it may take longer. They got the guns, but we got the numbers. Gonna win, yeah, we're taking over. Come on!
I'm Scott Muni, welcoming you to the conclusion of Jim Morrison, 3 Hours for Magic. This special has been developed in conjunction with the Delilah book, An Hour for Magic, a collection of Morrison poetry and photographs written by Frank Liscandro.
Your ballroom days are over, baby. Night is drawing near. Shadows of the evening crawl across the hill. Yeah, walk across the floor with a flower in your hand, trying to tell me no one understands. Trading your hours for a handful of dimes. Gonna make it, baby, in our prime. Come together one more time. Together one more time. Together one more time. Get together. Get together one more time. 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 Get together, get together, Hey, come on, honey. Go along home and wait for me, baby. I'll be there in just a little while. You see, I gotta go out in this car with these people.
In this hour, we'll attempt to clear up the controversy surrounding Jim's tragic death. Much of this controversy was started with a publication of No One Here Gets Out Alive, a book co-written by Jerry Hopkins and Danny Sugarman, and released 3 years ago, last April. In his own words, co-author Danny Sugarman.
Then there's the more interesting angle, which delights me, that no, Jim's not dead at all, and that he was just sick of being a rock star, sick of the pressures that stardom wrought, and he sought to escape. Street, he couldn't be anonymous, even with a beard and 80 extra pounds. And in Paris, ironically, all you need is a doctor's signature on a death statement saying you're dead. He said once to a group of us clustered on the floor in the office one day when he was showing us the lyrics he'd written for what was going to be the album L.A. Woman. And he pointed out that Mr. Mojo Rising was an anagram for the name Jim Morrison. But also, that's the name I'm going to use when I call you guys from Africa after I split the country. And I don't want anybody to know it's me.
In all fairness, it must be pointed out that Mr. Sugarman was only 13 years old at the time of his association with Jim Morrison. Robbie Krieger.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's all kinds of stories that people see Jim here and there. He's always showing up somewhere. I mean, I always have dreams that Jim is alive, you know, even to this day, you know. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it, but then again, it's pretty improbable. If anybody would fake his own death and go to Africa or something like that, it would be Jim. You know, there's a slight chance he could be fooling us again. I would not totally discount the fact, you know, because I didn't, and nobody I know, in fact, nobody who's alive today has actually seen Jim's body after the death. So the only one that we know who saw the body was Pamela, who was Jim's wife, and, you know, she died a couple of years ago.
Frank Liscandro.
I don't think Jim's alive. I really can't see how anyone could possibly believe that. It's a myth and a story that Ray and Danny have been espousing for years, only to, in some faint hope of keeping the myth of Jim Morrison alive, as if Jim Morrison needs this kind of mythic story told about him. It's ridiculous. The guy was the foremost singer and performer of his time, including Mick Jagger, I would say. He was one of the best poets. He was a filmmaker. He was an extraordinary character. And to have to tell stories, to make up stories about him is ridiculous. There's enough material that exists in his life that there's no stories need to be told. Let's just tell the truth. It's much more interesting than these tales that people are telling. Jim is dead. He's buried in Paris in Père Lachaise Cemetery. I've visited the place of his burial several times. I'm convinced that he's dead because, knowing him as well as I did, during those 4 years, I know that he couldn't be alive and not have been noticed, seen, recognized, picked up on by somebody, because he had an extraordinary personality. He just wasn't a guy who would walk down the street who you would pass by. You somehow noticed him. Even with a big beard, people would notice him. He was totally creative. We would be seeing his poems published now, maybe in French, maybe in English. I mean, there would be some hint, some clue. I don't think he could have gone underground for these 10, 11 years and be completely hidden. I think it's impossible. The only underground he's going is where he's buried.
Wait until the war is over and we're both a little older. The unknown soldier. Breakfast where the news is read, television, children fed, unborn living dead. Bullet strikes the helmet's head, and it's all over for the unknown soldier. It's all over for the unknown soldier. Make a grave for the unknown soldier. nestled in your hollow shoulder, the unknown soldier.
Life is where the news is read, television, children fed. Bullet strikes the helmet's head. It's all over. The war is over. It's all over. War is
Once and for all, former Doors manager Bill Siddons clears up the mystery surrounding how Jim died.
I called Pamela from L.A. and said, I've heard from a very reliable source that Jim died, and I want to know if it's true. And she said no. And I pushed her and managed to make her admit that it was true. And she tried to say, but don't worry, I've got it under control. And I said, Pamela, I'm coming. I'm coming to help you. I'm not coming to represent the Doors or for any business function. Jim was a friend. I'm coming to help. And she tried to tell me not to, and I just knew I had to. And I left town, got in a plane, and went to Paris. And I stayed at a hotel a couple blocks from their flat. And I spent many, many hours in the apartment, and Jim was in the bedroom in a casket that was, closed. It was God, I remember it so vividly. It was a beautiful white oak casket. I mean, I remember admiring the craftsmanship of it with big brass bolts that screwed it closed and that stuff. And it literally never occurred to me to open the casket. To me, it's such a barbaric practice to look at a dead body that I, honest to God, never thought of it until Jim was in the ground, and I called my business manager and said, I buried Jim. And he said, did you see the body? And I said, no, why would I? And he was like so astounded that I was that stupid. But hey, I threw the dirt on his casket. So it was too late. Let me go look. It just, it was something that never occurred to me. I couldn't imagine asking, let's get this casket open so I can verify that he's dead. Bullshit. Pamela was his woman for as long as I'd known the guy. And if she says he's dead, he's dead. I never believed in her ability to conspire enough to ever... And none of these myths about Jim's death have ever held any water with me. But they do fit his image perfectly. Jim was, like I say, always testing, always doing something really extraordinary. So I never really resented them. At this point in my life, I'm beginning to resent them because I feel like certain people are using it to exploit, using it to maintain a mythology. And, I kind of like the idea of helping Jim maintain the mythology, but at the same time, I don't like the idea of lying. And, I never saw his body, but I buried the man. I carried his casket, I put him in the ground. I lived through a few days with his wife, and I know that her pain was real. For no other reason, I lived through it with Pamela, and I know how real what she was living through was. She wasn't a good enough actress to pull that one off. So there's never been a question to me. Jim's dead, and Ray, if you want to keep saying, yeah, Jim could be around, go ahead and play your game, but to me it's a silly game.
My eyes are seeing you. My eyes are seeing you. My eyes are seeing you. Stand in your door. Meet inside. Show me some more. Show me some more. Show me some more. My eyes are seeing you. My eyes are seeing you. My eyes are seeing you. Turn and stare. Fix your hair.
Jim himself may well have found the reports of his death to be quite exaggerated.
When the still sea conspires in armor, and her sullen and aborted currents breed tiny monsters, true sailing is dead. Awkward instant, and the first animal is jettisoned. Legs furiously pumping their stiff green gallop, and heads bob up, poised, delicate, pause.
Adolf Hitler is still alive. Boos. I slept with her last night. Yeah! Come out from behind that false mustache, Adolf. I know you're in there. Ha 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 ha.
Again, we remind you that all exclusive material contained throughout is copyright James Douglas Morrison Publishing and may not be used outside the context of our show. Keyboardist Ray Manzarek offers an explanation for the roots of Jim's demise.
He got busted in Miami, man. Pulling out his ding-dong. Right. Hey, that helped kill him, man. That whole Miami thing helped kill Jim Morrison, killed his spirit. And when his spirit started to die, his body was not far behind.
Take the highway to the end of the night, end of the night, end of the night. Make a journey to the bright midnight, end of the night, end of the night. Realms of bliss, realms of light. Summer born to sweet delight. Summer born to sweet delight. Summer born to the endless night. End of the night. End of the night. End of the night. End of the night.
Bill Siddons continues.
The next morning after the show we did in Miami, we were walking down out of the elevator to go have breakfast, Jim and I and this woman named Bonnie Mandina, who was an attorney. very, very bright girl. And I believe it was her that said, Jim, what are you doing this for? Why do you go out on stage in front of thousands of people like you did last night and go through this whole cathartic experience to try to get them to listen to you? They just want a boogie. And Jim said, I just hope that someday I'm respected as a poet.
Jim Morrison was no stranger to death. Frank Liscandro explains.
Jim was interested in the subject of death. He was not afraid of the subject of death. He wrote about death, he sang about death, and he spoke freely about it. He wasn't interested in suicide. He was interested in pushing the boundary of life to the point where it came very close to death, so that he could experience, taste, feel, sense what it must be like. The fear or the sensation right on the edge between life and death is where the place he wanted to go to recharge his batteries, to get a glimpse to the other side. So he put himself in jeopardy many times to experience that.
Bill Siddons continues.
He was one of those people who would find a new experience and do it beyond any rationale to find out where it would ultimately get you. That side of his personality never left him. It was always extremism. It was always, how far can you push? What can you get out of this? I think that it was all kind of related to his fascination with death, because he knew that once you lose that battle, you lost it. But he was always trying to push it. He did a number of things throughout his life that all of us sat there just going, how could anyone take that big a chance with his life? He just did a number of things that were beyond comprehension. In Seattle one time, he jumped out of the 15th floor window, but he grabbed a window ledge on the way out. And of course, everybody in the room lost their minds for that long. It was like, ah! And he came back going, ha ha ha, gotcha. You know, that he tested you. He always wanted to know, how far can this situation get?
Bill Siddons' wife, Sherry.
There was an incident in Hawaii where we had all gone over there, and he decided he wanted to rent a motorcycle and go driving all over the islands, and he was drunk. And we had hired this giant bodyguard for him that was supposed to protect him and everything. And so we all go traipsing off to the lobby, and I'm very determined that he's not going to do this. And he's telling the girl over the phone, find me this motorcycle, I'm going to go riding. And she's looking at me, and I'm saying, don't do this. Absolutely do not get him a motorcycle. And so she's looking at me and looking at him, and he says, he touches my stomach, and he said, this is my wife. He said, but don't listen to her, she's a little bit upset. And he's kind of, patronizing or placating me in some sense. And Tony, the bodyguard, is standing there, and everybody's just standing there. Jim was very powerful, and he wants a motorcycle. So finally I thought, okay, what can I do? And I walked outside, and the motorcycle showed up, and I said, we don't need you today, thank you very much. And he turned around and left. And so Jim didn't get to ride the motorcycle. And he just kind of went off. He was like a child in some ways, and he just, I'm not going to ride a motorcycle. Okay, next. But the next day he came up to me and he said, I want to thank you. He said, I probably would have killed myself on that. And I said, I know.
Jim Morrison was obsessed with life, man. Jim said sex starts it and death ends it.
Jim's fascination with death sprung from a childhood incident on a desert road in Arizona. Frank Liscandro explains.
Jim being out in a car with his parents when he was about 4 years old comes upon this accident on the highway. And maybe we should just let him tell the story.
Indians scattered on dawn's highway bleeding. Ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind.
Me and my mother and father and a grandmother and a grandfather were driving through the desert at dawn, and a truckload of Indian workers had either hit another car or just, I don't know what happened, but there were Indians scattered all over the highway, bleeding to death. So the car pulls up and stops. That was the first time I tasted fear. I must have been about 4. Like a child, it's like a flower. His head is just floating in the breeze, man. The reaction I get now, thinking about it, looking back, is that the souls or the ghosts of those dead Indians, maybe 1 or 2 of them, were just running around, freaking out, and just leaped into my soul. And they're still there.
The point of the story is that either Jim believed the spirits of these dead Indians, who were probably shamanistic spirits, had jumped into his body and possessed him. Either he believed that, or he was trying to give some explanation for some of the extraordinary kinds of talents that he displayed. Because on stage, he was not unlike a shaman.
Indians scattered on dawn's highway bleeding. Ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind. Blood in the streets in the town of New Haven. Blood stains the roofs and the palm trees of Venice. Blood in my love in the terrible summer. Bloody red sun of fantastic LA. Blood screams the brain and tap off the fingers. Blood will be born in the birth of a nation. Blood is the rose of mysterious union.
Indian, Indian, what did you die for? Indian says nothing at all. Then we hear all these horns honking in the rhythm. Da 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 da, and sirens distant, approaching.
Doors keyboardist Raymond Zarek.
That's an old tribal thing, man. That's Jim getting back inside of him, deep down into the very roots of what we were and what we came from, man. We came from little primitive creatures, man, little Neanderthal men.
Did you stop to consider how it will feel? Cold grinding grizzly bear jaws hot on your heels. Do you want to stop and whisper in Saturday shore? The whole world's a savior who could ever ask for more. Do you remember? Will you stop? Will you stop the pain? There will never be another one like you. There will never be another one who can do the things you do. Oh, will you give another chance? Will you try, little try? Please stop and you remember we were together. Anyway,
You'll be dead and in hell before I'm born. Sure thing. Bridesmaid. The only solution. Isn't it amazing?
Shaman's Blues from the LP Soft Parade. Frank Liscandro.
Jim was like a shaman. I see him now clearly more and more as a shamanistic figure. His use of ritualistic poetry. I guess shaman, you can say, is a word in anthropology that means witch doctor, which means medicine man, a spiritual figure in a tribal community, in a primitive community, that was in charge of being the mediator between us humans and the gods. Jim was interested in shamanism. He was interested in the other side of reality. He was interested in coming to grips with the forces on the other side of reality. Look at his poems, look at his songs. They're always talking about breaking on through to the other side in some way or another.
Think of it as a seance in an environment which has become hostile to life, cold, restrictive. People feel that they're dying in a bad landscape. They gather together in a seance in order to invoke, palliate, and drive away the dead.
Jim Morrison in a rare interview.
Come along.
spring has come, that it's time to live in the scattered sun. Waiting for the sun, waiting for the sun, waiting for the sun, waiting for the sun.
How are we doing on time?
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. She's walking down the street, blind to every eye she meets. Do you think you'll be the guy to make the queen of the angels sigh? Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. She holds her head so high, like a statue in the sky. Her arms are wicked and her legs are long. When she moves, my brain screams out this song. Sidewalk crouches at her feet, like a dog that begs for something sweet. Do you hope to make her see you, fool? Do you hope to pluck this dusky jewel? Hello, 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 hello. I want you, I need my
Frank Liscandro.
I really want people to get the impression that he was a serious artist, that he was committed to writing, to filmmaking, to poetry, and that he wasn't going to waste his talent in alcohol. I think that it's terrible that we leave people with the impression that he was a good-for-nothing kind of alcoholic without any redeeming social graces. In fact, what I remember of him best is that he was a kind and generous friend, and that he was a totally creative human being who cared more about something being perfect, some form of communication between human beings being perfect, than he cared about anything else, and that his purpose in life was to create things of beauty for the rest of us to enjoy.
For the first time ever, the powerful whiskey, mystics, and men.
Well, I'll tell you a story of whiskey and mystics and men. Da-da-da. And about the believers and how the whole thing began. Da-da-da. First there were women and children obeying the moon. Da-da-da. Then daylight brought wisdom and fever and sickness too soon. Da-da-da. You can try to remind me instead of the other, you can. Da-da-da. You can help to ensure that we all insecure our command. Da-da-da. If you don't give a listen, I won't try to tell your new hand. Da-da-da. This is it, can't you see that we all have our ends in the band? Da-da-da. 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 And if all of the teachers and preachers of wealth were arraigned, da-da-da, we could see quite a future for me in the literal sands, da-da-da. And if all of the people could claim to inspect such regret, Da-da-da. Well, we'd have no forgiveness, forgetfulness, faithful remorse. Da-da-da. So I tell you, we must send away. Mm-mm. We must try to find a new answer instead of a way. Da-da-da.
Jim's father-in-law, Corky Courson.
This is the last thing I wrote, written the day he died. Hello, Bob. How are you? The weather today finally turned sunny after a month of gray. Paris is beautiful in the sun, an exciting town built for human beings. Speaking to Bill a while back, I told him of our desire to stay on here indefinitely. Will that be possible? Could you write and give me an idea of how long we can stay on living at our present rate? A sort of financial statement in general. Also a copy of the partnership agreement if it was ever completed. We've decided to turn the shop over to Tom and Judy so they can seek a loan. All but the furnishings and some personal things which we'll keep. Eventually we'd like to be completely clear of any involvement. Could you help figure out the best way to do this? Incidentally, would you ask Judy for her parents' address and send them $100 for the dog? Any luck on the credit cards? We could use them, made out in both our names. What's the problem? And if you'd send our check when you receive this, house bills are catching up. Please send $3,000. Give our best to all. Later, Jim. You can see it's sort of different from the stories they tell. You know, they tell about his in Paris taking people out on wild parties and paying for everything on a credit card. Here, he doesn't have a credit card. So this is darn lies. Does this letter sound like a man that's really down and depressed and everything?
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. The end of our elaborate plans. The end of everything that stands. The end, no safety or surprise. The end, I'll never look into your eyes again. Can you picture what will be so limitless and free? Desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land.
ride the snake to the lake, the ancient lake, baby. The snake is long, 7 miles. Ride the snake. He's old and his skin is cold. The West is the best. The West is the best. Get here and we'll do the rest. The blue bus is calling us. The blue bus is calling us. Driver, where you take it up? The killer awoke before dawn. He put his boots on. He took a face from the ancient gallery and he walked on down the hall. He went into the room where his sister lived, and then he paid a visit to his brother, and then he walked on down the hall, and he came to a door, and he looked inside. Father, yes son, I want to kill you. Mother, I want to. Come on, baby, take a chance with us. Come on, baby, take a chance with us. Come on, baby, take a chance with us and meet me at the back of the blue bus. Do not blue rock on that blue bus. Do not. Come on, yeah. the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. The end. It hurts to set you free, but you'll never follow me. The end of laughter and soft lies. The end of nights we try to die. This is the
Jim Morrison, 3 Hours for Magic, is a Jon Sargent production, distributed internationally by London Wavelength. 3 Hours for Magic is based on Frank Liscandro's best-selling photojournal, An Hour for Magic, a Delilah book publication. Associate producer for this special was David A. Shapiro, with additional production by Bob Love. The producer would like to thank all those involved for their time and energy, particularly Corky Courson, executor of the James Douglas Morrison Estate, and John Haney, co-producer of the American Prayer album, as well as former Doors manager Bill Siddons and his wife, Sherry. Additional material provided by The Creative Factor. Special thanks to Don Eberly, Mike Vaughn, Jessica Nathans, Gail Miller, Karen Petrone, and Rita Rokiski. Recording equipment was provided by Audio Services and the Control Center in Los Angeles, with Al Sowers, Gary Gladstone, Aisley Otten, Rick Altschuler, and Kurt Wilson serving as engineers. Cam Fairchild was East Coast representative for this show, with additional consultation by Lynette Lebrun. I'm Scott Muni, and this has been Jim Morrison, 3 Hours for Magic.
This is the end.